The final battle began at dawn on Earth as hegemony orbital platforms opened fire on major population centers while human resistance forces launched their desperate counterattack. Casey Williams stood on the observation deck of the liberated Aurora and watched streams of energy weapons light up the sky above. New York, the aliens had abandoned all pretense of conquest and were now focused solely on genocide. Dr. Hughes and Maya Patel worked frantically in the ship's modified engineering bay to complete the most ambitious project of the war. They were building a planet-scale version of the Kethmori disruptor that would permanently disable every piece of hegemony technology in the solar system. The device required precise calibration and would need to be activated from multiple locations simultaneously. Captain Morrison coordinated with Resistance cells across 6 continents as they fought to reach the activation points for the massive disruptor array. Each team faced overwhelming odds but pressed forward anyway because they knew this was humanity's last chance to survive. The alternative was extinction, and that was simply not acceptable to any of them. Alex Rodriguez transmitted activation codes to resistance groups throughout the galaxy while monitoring communications from dozens of other worlds, where similar final battles were taking place. The rebellion had spread far beyond what anyone had imagined possible, and species that had been enslaved for centuries were making their own desperate bids for freedom. Ryan Hayes led his team through the burning streets of Washington, D.C. toward the alien command center that controlled the orbital bombardment platforms. Tony Clark carried enough explosives to level several city blocks while Ellen Price provided covering fire from rooftops that were being systematically destroyed by enemy weapons. The mission was suicidal, but that had never stopped humans before. General Wright maintained communication with Kethmori refugee fleets that were engaging hegemony reinforcements at the edge of the solar system. The ancient aliens had brought weapons technology that was centuries ahead of anything the parasites possessed, but they were vastly outnumbered. The battle in space would determine whether Earth had enough time to complete its desperate gambit. Ben Carter and Dr. Stone worked to activate the disruptor network from their position in the Australian facility, while hegemony ground forces closed in on their location. The 2 scientists had spent months preparing for this moment and refused to be stopped when they were so close to success. Their calculations showed that the device would work, but only if all activation points were triggered within seconds of each other. Steve Coleman piloted a commandeered alien shuttle through the ruins of London, while Dr. Foster treated wounded resistance fighters in the cargo bay. Their mission was to reach the European activation point before hegemony forces could destroy it. The city was being systematically leveled, but human determination proved stronger than alien firepower. Nick Thompson coordinated the timing for the global activation sequence from his mobile command post while monitoring reports from resistance cells on 40 different worlds. The synchronization had to be perfect or the disruptor array would fail and billions of beings would die. The pressure was enormous, but he had learned to function under impossible conditions. Casey Williams fought her way through the alien fortress beneath the ruins of the United Nations building where Ambassador Zethkar had established his final command center. The young woman who had started the rebellion was determined to end it by confronting the architect of humanity's suffering. Her immunity to psychic attacks gave her a crucial advantage in the heavily defended facility. Maya Patel made final adjustments to the disruptor array while monitoring energy readings that showed the device was reaching critical capacity. The ancient Kethmori technology was integrating perfectly with human engineering, but the power requirements were enormous. Every resistance cell would need to succeed for the weapon to function properly. The synchronized activation began exactly at noon, Greenwich Mean Time, as resistance fighters around the world triggered their disruptor devices simultaneously. The effect was immediate and devastating as every piece of hegemony technology within 1,000 light-years simply stopped functioning. Orbital platforms fell silent. Ground vehicles shut down and alien life support systems failed completely. Zethkar faced Casey in his command chamber as his empire collapsed around him and demanded to know how a primitive species had managed to defeat beings who had conquered the galaxy. She explained that humans had one advantage the hegemony could never understand. They were willing to die rather than live as slaves. Freedom meant more to them than survival itself, the ambassador attempted to use his psychic abilities to break Casey's will one final time, but discovered that her immunity had grown stronger throughout the war. She was not just resistant to mind control, but completely immune to any form of mental manipulation. The parasite that had fed on the despair of countless civilizations found nothing to consume in her mind except unbreakable determination. Ryan Hayes reached the bombardment control center just as the disruptor wave swept through the facility and watched alien commanders collapse as their technology failed. Without their mechanical advantages, the hegemony forces were revealed to be physically weak beings who had relied entirely on psychological warfare. Human soldiers quickly overwhelmed positions that had seemed impregnable minutes earlier. General Wright received confirmation that the disruptor wave had reached every major hegemony installation in the galaxy and was spreading outward at the speed of light. Enslaved species on thousands of worlds were waking up from centuries of artificial compliance and discovering that their captors were now helpless. The greatest empire in galactic history was crumbling within hours. Dr. Hughes monitored the cascade. Effect as Kethmori technology proved even more effective than anyone had hoped. The disruptor wave was not just shutting down hegemony equipment, but permanently destroying their ability to rebuild it. The parasites would never again be able to enslave other species, because the fundamental principles behind their technology had been rendered inoperable. Tony Clark set explosive charges throughout the alien fortress while Ellen Price eliminated the few hegemony guards who remained functional. The resistance had learned that showing mercy to parasites was pointless, because they would simply rebuild their empire if given the chance. Complete destruction was the only way to ensure that no species would ever again suffer under alien domination. Alex Rodriguez coordinated with newly freed civilizations as they began hunting down the scattered remnants of hegemony forces. The galaxy was transforming from a place of fear and oppression into something entirely new where cooperation replaced conquest. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together to build a future based on freedom, rather than slavery. Ben Carter and Dr. Stone emerged from their facility to find that the bombardment had stopped and hegemony ground forces were surrendering or fleeing. The disruptor array had worked perfectly, and every alien installation on Earth was now dark and lifeless. Humanity had won its freedom, but the cost had been enormous, with entire cities reduced to rubble. Casey Williams stood over the body of Ambassador Zethkar and felt no satisfaction in victory. The alien had died when his life support systems failed. But his species had caused suffering on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds had lived and died as slaves because of hegemony greed and cruelty. Captain Morrison addressed representatives from dozens of liberated species who had gathered on Earth to discuss the future of the galaxy. He explained that humanity had no desire to replace the hegemony as galactic rulers, but simply wanted to ensure that freedom would never again be threatened by parasitic conquerors. The new alliance would be based on mutual respect rather than domination. The reconstruction began immediately as human engineering teams worked alongside alien refugees to rebuild the devastated worlds. The Kethmori shared their advanced technology freely, while other species contributed their own knowledge and resources. What emerged was a galactic civilization unlike anything that had existed before. Maya Patel established academies where young beings from different worlds could learn together and form friendships that would prevent future conflicts. The curriculum emphasized the importance of freedom and the dangers of allowing any group to gain too much power over others. The children who attended these schools would become the foundation of the new galactic order. Years later, Casey Williams watched a mixed group of human and alien children playing in a park on New Earth while their parents worked together to build a better future. The war was over and the galaxy was finally free, but she knew that vigilance would always be necessary. Freedom required constant protection from those who would take it away. The memorial wall listed the names of every being who had died fighting the hegemony, including millions of humans who had refused to surrender despite impossible odds. Their sacrifice had made the new age of freedom possible, and their memory would serve as a reminder that some things were worth dying for. General Wright's final report concluded that humanity's greatest weapon had not been technology or military skill, but simply the refusal to accept defeat. The resistance hideout in the Australian outback buzzed with activity as reports came in from around the galaxy. Dr. Stone stood before a holographic display showing the locations of failed suppression field generators across 12 star systems. The cascade effect of the Kethmori disruptors had exceeded all expectations, and millions of beings were waking up from artificial compliance for the first time in decades. Ben Carter analyzed soil samples from recently liberated worlds and found evidence that the hegemony had been strip mining planets for resources while keeping their populations sedated. The aliens were not just conquerors, but parasites who consumed entire civilizations before moving on to new victims. This discovery gave the rebellion even more urgency as they realized how little time remained before Earth suffered the same fate. Maya Patel worked around the clock to increase production of disruptor devices using plans that had been transmitted to resistance cells throughout human space. The ancient Kethmori technology was proving to be remarkably adaptable and could be modified to work against different types of hegemony equipment. What had started as a weapon against suppression fields was becoming a complete arsenal for liberation. Captain Morrison received a transmission from the Zephyr mining station in the asteroid belt where human workers had overthrown their alien overseers. The message was repeated by dozens of other facilities as news of the rebellion spread faster than the hegemony could contain it. Humans throughout the solar system were rising up against their captors with whatever weapons they could improvise. Casey Williams led a strike team through the ruins of New York City, where hegemony forces had established a major command center. The 18-year-old had become a symbol of human resistance whose mere presence on a battlefield could inspire desperate acts of heroism from ordinary people. Her immunity to psychic attacks made her invaluable for missions against heavily defended alien positions. Alex Rodriguez coordinated communications between resistance cells and newly contacted alien species who were attempting their own rebellions. His network had expanded beyond Earth to include dozens of worlds where the spark of human defiance was igniting long-dormant hopes for freedom. The galaxy was learning that the hegemony could be defeated if enough beings refused to surrender. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes received intelligence that the aliens were preparing to abandon Earth and destroy all human life rather than risk the rebellion spreading further. Orbital bombardment platforms were being moved into position around the planet, while hegemony ground forces consolidated around key installations. The endgame was approaching, and humanity would need to act quickly to prevent genocide. General Wright made contact with surviving Kethmori, who had been hiding in deep space for generations after their homeworld fell to the hegemony. These refugees had been waiting for someone brave enough to challenge their conquerors and were eager to share advanced weapons technology with the human resistance. Their ships began arriving in the solar system just as the final battle was about to begin. Tony Clark infiltrated a hegemony weapons depot on the moon and discovered that the aliens had been preparing planet killer devices for use against any world that proved too difficult to conquer. The existence of these weapons explained why no previous rebellion had succeeded. The hegemony simply destroyed entire civilizations rather than allow them to remain free. Ellen Price provided sniper support for rescue operations that freed thousands of humans from processing centers around the world. Her success rate against alien targets had reached legendary status among resistance fighters who began calling her the Ghost of Freedom. Hegemony commanders issued orders that she was to be captured alive so they could study her seemingly supernatural abilities. Dr. Hughes made a breakthrough discovery when analyzing captured hegemony technology. The alien psychic suppression devices worked by amplifying natural despair and helplessness, while dampening hope and determination. This explained why humans were more resistant than other species. Their history of surviving disasters had given them an unusual ability to maintain hope in hopeless situations. Nick Thompson established communication with rebel groups on 47 different worlds and discovered that the Hegemony Empire was much larger than anyone had imagined. Over 300 species had been conquered during the past millennium, but many had left hidden survivors who were now emerging to join the fight. Humanity had become the catalyst for the largest rebellion in galactic history. Steve Coleman piloted refugee ships, carrying liberated aliens to safe worlds beyond hegemony control, while Dr. Foster provided medical care for beings who had spent decades under psychic suppression. The psychological damage caused by alien mind control was severe, but most victims recovered quickly once they remembered what freedom felt like. The tide of war began turning decisively in favor of the rebellion as more worlds threw off hegemony control. The aliens found themselves fighting on hundreds of fronts simultaneously against enemies who shared tactics and technology through Casey's communication network. Their military forces were designed for conquest and occupation rather than defending against coordinated resistance movements. Ryan Hayes led an assault on the main hegemony fortress on Earth, while resistant cells around the planet attacked smaller installations. The synchronized offensive was timed to coincide with similar operations on dozens of other worlds. The rebels were determined to prevent the aliens from destroying any more civilizations out of spite. Ambassador Zethkar appeared on global broadcast to announce that humanity had failed their trials and would face immediate termination. The alien's calm demeanor had been replaced by obvious frustration and fear as his species' empire crumbled around him. He threatened to turn Earth into a dead rock unless all resistance activity ceased immediately. The threat only strengthened human resolve as millions of people who had remained neutral joined the rebellion. Parents fought to protect their children while elderly citizens sabotaged alien equipment with whatever tools they could find. The hegemony had made the mistake of threatening humanity's survival, which triggered every protective instinct that evolution had bred into the species. Casey Williams confronted Zethkar directly during the battle for the alien command center and demanded to know why the hegemony destroyed civilizations instead of simply leaving them alone. The ambassador explained that his species had evolved as parasites who required the mental energy of other beings to survive. They could not change their nature any more than humans could stop breathing. This revelation changed the nature of the conflict from a war of liberation to a fight for survival. There could be no peaceful coexistence with a species that required the enslavement of others to live. The rebellion would have to completely destroy hegemony, civilization, or watch every free species in the galaxy be consumed by alien parasites. Maya Patel modified the disruptor devices to target hegemony life support systems directly rather than just their technology. The ancient Kethmori had apparently reached the same conclusion about the impossibility of coexistence and designed their weapons to be lethal against their enemies. The tide of battle shifted dramatically as human forces gained access to weapons that could kill the aliens outright. General Wright coordinated the final offensive that would either free the galaxy or result in the extinction of every rebelling species. Hundreds of worlds launched simultaneous attacks against hegemony strongholds, while human ships provided tactical support and advanced weapons to alien resistance groups. The outcome would depend on whether the parasites could destroy their enemies. Before losing control of their empire, the battle for Earth's future was about to begin, and humanity stood ready to prove that some species simply could not be broken, no matter how hopeless their situation appeared. They had learned that freedom was worth any sacrifice and that death was preferable to slavery. The galaxy would soon discover what happened when parasites encountered prey that refused to be consumed. Dr. Sam Hughes connected the final crystal matrix to the power coupling and stepped back as the ancient Kethmori device hummed to life. Maya Patel checked the energy readings on her scanner and nodded with satisfaction. 3 weeks of careful reverse engineering had finally paid off, and they now had a working prototype of the frequency disruptor that could permanently disable hegemony suppression fields. The device looked like a metallic sphere covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with an inner light. According to the Kethmori archives, it would need to be placed within 1 kilometer of a monitoring station to have any effect. The disruption would spread outward in a chain reaction that would free thousands of humans from psychic control. Captain. Jake Morrison crouched behind a pile of debris on the outer hull of the Aurora and watched hegemony guards patrol the corridors of his ship. The aliens had taken control of the vessel 2 weeks earlier when he refused to hand over the location of resistance bases. His crew was imprisoned somewhere inside, but Jake was determined to get them back. Steve Coleman drifted silently through space in a maintenance suit while Dr. Linda Foster monitored his progress from their hidden shuttle. The plan was simple but dangerous. Infiltrate the ship through the waste disposal system and work their way to the detention cells. The hegemony would never expect such a primitive approach from supposedly advanced humans the aliens had made. A crucial mistake in underestimating human creativity and willingness to take desperate risks. Their previous conquests had all been logical species who calculated odds and surrendered when defeat seemed certain. Humans ignored mathematics when their survival was at stake and attempted impossible rescues as a matter of course. Casey Williams stood outside the Luna monitoring station and checked her equipment one final time. The 17-year-old had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of the war, infiltrating the main control center and planting Dr. Hughes' disruptor device. Her immunity to psychic fields made her the only person who could get close enough to succeed. Alex Rodriguez monitored her approach from Earth using hijacked satellite feeds while coordinating with resistance cells around the world. If KC could disable the Luna station, it would trigger cascade failures in monitoring stations across 3 continents. Millions of humans would wake up from their artificial calm and remember what they were fighting for. The hegemony had responded to increasing resistance activity by bringing in their most experienced commanders from successful conquests on other worlds. These beings had overseen the subjugation of dozens of species and considered humans just another primitive race that needed proper guidance. They were completely unprepared for the level of desperate ingenuity that humanity could achieve. Ryan Hayes led his team through the underground tunnels beneath Chicago, where a major hegemony processing facility converted captured humans into compliant servants. The aliens had taken over the city's subway system and turned it into a massive brainwashing center. Thousands of people were being held there awaiting integration into alien society. Tony Clark carried enough explosives to level several city blocks while Ellen Price provided overwatch from a concealed position 3 kilometers away. Nick Thompson jammed hegemony communications in the area to prevent them from calling for reinforcements. The rescue mission would either save thousands of lives or get them all killed in the attempt. General Wright coordinated the global assault from his mobile command center while staying in constant contact with resistance cells on 6 worlds. The simultaneous attacks were designed to overwhelm hegemony forces and prevent them from concentrating their defenses. Human military doctrine had always emphasized speed and unpredictability over technological superiority. The first phase of the operation began when Casey successfully infiltrated the Luna station using maintenance shafts that the aliens had never bothered to guard. Her small size and natural immunity allowed her to reach the central control room where she planted the disruptor device. The explosion that followed could be seen from Earth as psychic suppression fields across North America collapsed. Jake Morrison felt the change immediately as his mind cleared of the subtle fog that had been clouding his thoughts for months. The ship's crew began waking up from their artificial calm and remembering why they had joined the resistance. Within minutes, they had overpowered their guards and retaken control of the Aurora. Dr. Stone transmitted the technical specifications for building more disruptor devices to every resistance cell that could receive them. The Kethmori technology was surprisingly adaptable and could be constructed using materials available on any industrialized world. Within hours, similar devices were being assembled in hidden workshops across the galaxy. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal as they realized their primary method of control was being systematically destroyed. Hunter-killer squads were deployed to eliminate resistance leaders, while orbital bombardment platforms targeted areas where humans had regained their independence. The aliens abandoned all pretense of benevolence and revealed their true nature as conquerors. This change in tactics proved to be a fatal mistake because it gave every human clear evidence of what the hegemony really represented. People who had been willing to cooperate with seemingly helpful aliens were outraged to discover they had been deceived. The resistance gained thousands of new recruits as the truth spread faster than the aliens could contain it. Ryan's team successfully rescued over 3,000 humans from the Chicago processing facility before hegemony reinforcements arrived. The freed prisoners included scientists, military personnel, and civilian leaders who immediately joined the fight against their former captors. Each successful rescue operation provided the resistance with more skilled personnel and valuable intelligence. Steve Coleman piloted the Aurora through a running battle with hegemony patrol ships, while Jake Morrison coordinated with other captured vessels that had been liberated by their crews. The aliens discovered that humans could turn any piece of technology into a weapon given sufficient motivation and creativity. Ships designed for peaceful exploration became deadly combatants in the hands of desperate crews, Maya Patel established production facilities for disruptor devices in remote locations where the hegemony could not easily find them. The ancient Kethmori designs proved remarkably effective against modern alien technology, suggesting that the previous inhabitants had spent considerable time studying their enemies before their civilization fell. Casey Williams led a second mission to destroy the main hegemony command center on Luna, but found that the aliens had learned from their previous defeat. The facility was now heavily defended with energy shields and automated weapons systems. However, human determination and tactical flexibility allowed her team to succeed where conventional military assault would have failed. Ellen Price eliminated over 30 hegemony commanders using long-range precision shots that the aliens could not prevent or predict. Her success demonstrated that individual humans with proper training and equipment could be more effective than entire alien military units. The psychological impact on hegemony forces was devastating as their leaders began to fear for their safety. The cascade effect of failing suppression fields spread across multiple star systems as liberated species on other worlds began using Kethmori technology to free themselves. The hegemony found themselves fighting desperate rebellions on dozens of fronts, simultaneously with enemies who refused to follow conventional military logic. Dr. Hughes discovered that the disruptor devices could be modified to not only disable suppression fields but also disrupt hegemony communications and life support systems. This gave the resistance offensive capabilities that could threaten alien ships and installations directly. The hunters were becoming the hunted as human ingenuity turned the tide of war. The aliens began retreating from outlying systems as their empire started collapsing under the weight of simultaneous rebellions. Species that had been enslaved for centuries found the courage to fight back after witnessing humanity's refusal to surrender. The galactic order that had existed for millennia was crumbling as the hegemony lost control of their psychological weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Hayes crouched in the abandoned mineshaft deep in the Appalachian Mountains and studied the reports coming in from resistance cells around the world. 3 months had passed since General Wright's warning about the hegemony's true intentions, and the situation was getting worse every day. The psychic suppression fields now covered most major population centers, leaving millions of humans in a docile trance. Tony Clark finished setting explosive charges around the entrance to their hidden base while Ellen Price kept watch through her sniper scope. Nick Thompson monitored radio frequencies for any sign that their location had been discovered. The resistance had learned to stay mobile and trust no one who had spent time near the alien monitoring stations. Ryan's team had started with over 200 military personnel, but hegemony hunter squads had tracked down most of the larger groups. The aliens were efficient at eliminating resistance leaders and seemed to know exactly where to find them. Only small cells operating in remote areas managed to survive for more than a few weeks. Dr. Stone's discovery on New Haven had changed everything. For the resistance movement, the Kethmori archives provided proof that the Hegemony could be fought and detailed plans for weapons that could disrupt their technology. The problem was getting this information to resistance cells without the aliens. Intercepting the communications. Casey Williams sat in her family's farmhouse in rural Montana and stared at the television screen where Zethkar was giving another speech about humanity's bright future. The 16-year-old girl was one of the few people who could see through the aliens' lies without any difficulty. While her parents and siblings smiled peacefully at the ambassador's words, Casey felt nothing but rage. She had discovered her immunity to the psychic fields by accident when visiting a friend in the city. Everyone around her became calm and cooperative, while Casey remained completely unaffected. The suppression technology that worked on most humans had no impact on her mind for reasons she did not understand. Alex Rodriguez was another teenager with natural resistance to the alien influence. The 18-year-old hacker had been working to establish secure communication networks between resistance cells using techniques that the hegemony could not easily trace. He and Casey met through an encrypted chat room and quickly became the backbone of the underground information network. The two young people coordinated with survivors, like Dr. Stone, who was still hiding on New Haven with Ben Carter and Sam Hughes. The scientists had found more Kethmori weapon caches and were working to understand how the ancient technology functioned. Their research showed that the previous inhabitants had been preparing for rebellion even as their civilization fell. General Wright operated from a mobile command center that never stayed in one location for more than 24 hours. He maintained contact with resistance cells across 6 continents and tried to coordinate their efforts against increasingly sophisticated hegemony countermeasures. The aliens seemed to learn from every defeat and adapted their tactics accordingly. The resistance discovered that children and teenagers were naturally more resistant to psychic manipulation than adults. This meant that many of the most effective fighters were young people who had lost their families to the suppression fields. Casey and Alex recruited dozens of immune individuals and trained them in basic communications and sabotage techniques. Ryan's team successfully destroyed 3 monitoring stations in the eastern United States before the hegemony began protecting them with energy shields. The aliens retaliated by increasing the power of remaining stations, which put more humans under their control, but also made the resistance more desperate and dangerous. Dr. Stone decoded a crucial piece of information from the Kethmori archives about the source of the psychic suppression technology. The fields were generated by quantum resonance devices that required specific frequency patterns to function properly. If these patterns could be disrupted, the suppression effects would be permanently disabled across entire regions. She shared this discovery with the resistance through Casey's communication network, but getting the technical specifications to people who could build disruption devices proved nearly impossible. Most scientists and engineers were located in cities where the suppression fields were strongest. Those few who remained free lacked the resources and equipment needed for such complex work. The breakthrough came when Alex managed to hack into a hegemony data stream and discovered that the aliens were having unexpected difficulties with their conquest of humanity. Previous species had surrendered completely within 6 months of first contact, but humans continued to resist despite overwhelming odds. The psychological profiles that worked on other races were proving inadequate for dealing with human stubbornness. Internal hegemony communications revealed frustration with humanity's refusal to accept their fate. The aliens had conquered over 200 civilizations using identical methods, but humans seemed incapable of recognizing when they were beaten. Even those under the influence of suppression fields retained enough independence to cause problems for their conquerors. This information gave the resistance hope that victory might be possible if they could maintain their fighting spirit long enough. The hegemony's entire strategy depended on breaking the will of their victims, but humans had a long history of continuing to fight in hopeless situations. From ancient battles against impossible odds to modern wars of liberation, humanity had always refused to surrender when their survival was at stake. Casey led a daring mission to rescue scientists from a hegemony processing facility where humans were being prepared for integration into alien society. The facility was heavily guarded, but the aliens did not expect an attack by someone immune to their psychic weapons. She infiltrated the complex and freed dozens of prisoners, including several engineers, who could help build the frequency disruptors. The rescued scientists confirmed Dr. Stone's theories about the suppression technology and began working on devices that could permanently disable the quantum resonance fields. They estimated that disrupting just 10% of the monitoring stations would create cascade failures that would free entire continents from alien control. Ellen Price provided sniper support for multiple sabotage missions, while Tony Clark developed new explosive techniques specifically designed to penetrate hegemony shields. Nick Thompson established communication links with resistance movements on other worlds where enslaved species were beginning to rebel after intercepting human transmissions. The aliens responded to increasing resistance activity by accelerating their timeline for humanity's final evaluation. Zethkar announced that the trial period was ending ahead of schedule and that integration would begin within weeks. This ultimatum was intended to demoralize the resistance, but instead convinced more humans that they had nothing left to lose. Ryan received word that similar resistance movements were forming throughout the galaxy as other conquered species found inspiration in humanity's refusal to surrender. The hegemony's empire was beginning to show cracks as client races questioned whether their masters were truly invincible. General Wright coordinated with these alien resistance groups and discovered that the hegemony had never faced a prolonged insurgency before. Their psychological warfare tactics were designed to prevent resistance from forming rather than defeating it once it had begun. Humanity's stubborn nature had created a situation that the aliens were unprepared to handle. As the final evaluation approached, the resistance prepared for what might be their last chance to save their species. They had weapons that could hurt. The hegemony and allies throughout the galaxy who were ready to fight. Most importantly, they had something that no previous victim had possessed: the absolute refusal to be broken, no matter how hopeless their situation appeared. Dr. Rachel Stone stepped off the transport ship and breathed the clean air of New Haven. The colony world was supposed to be humanity's shining example of successful terraforming, but something felt wrong to her trained scientific eye. The ecosystem was too perfect and too balanced for a world that had only been settled for 5 years. Ben Carter unpacked his geological equipment and immediately noticed that the soil composition did not match the planetary surveys from before colonization. The mineral distribution suggested the planet had been extensively modified by advanced technology. Sam Hughes set up his xenobiology lab and began studying the local plant and animal life that all seemed strangely familiar despite being on an alien world. The 3 scientists had been sent to New Haven to study how human colonies were adapting during the hegemony evaluation period. What they found instead was evidence that the planet had been home to another intelligent species long before humans arrived. Hidden beneath the carefully maintained surface ecosystem were ruins that told a different story. Meanwhile, on Earth, intelligence analyst Maria Santos worked late into the night studying historical records provided by the hegemony. The aliens had been very generous with information about their galactic community and the many species that belonged to it. However, Maria noticed disturbing patterns in the data that kept her awake with worry. Every species that had undergone the trials seemed to follow the same path. First came the evaluation period where they proved their worthiness. Then came integration into hegemony society where they contributed their unique abilities to the greater good. Finally came transcendence, where successful species moved beyond physical existence to join the galactic consciousness. The problem was that no species ever seemed to maintain contact after transcendence. Their homeworlds became empty and their colonies were absorbed into the hegemony. Maria could find no record of any species that had successfully completed the trials and remained independent. This troubled her enough to take her concerns to General Paul Wright. General Wright had been growing suspicious of the hegemony for his own reasons. Military installations around the world reported strange effects near the monitoring stations. Soldiers stationed close to these facilities showed decreased aggression and reduced independent thinking. Medical tests revealed no physical cause. But the psychological changes were undeniable. Dr. Stone made her most disturbing discovery while exploring a deep cave system on New Haven. The caverns contained what appeared to be a massive archive of crystalline storage devices. When she touched one of the crystals, it activated and filled her mind with images and sounds from the planet's previous inhabitants. The species called themselves the Kethmori, and they had been proud warriors and explorers much like humans. When the hegemony first contacted them, the Kethmori were excited to join the galactic community. They underwent the same trials that humanity now faced and passed each test with flying colors, but the trials were not what they seemed. Each challenge was designed to identify and eliminate potential resistance leaders within Kethmori society. The hegemony studied their culture and psychology until they understood exactly how to break their spirit. The final trial was not a test but a trap that left the species defenseless against conquest. The crystal archives revealed the terrible truth about the hegemony. They were not benevolent guides but parasitic conquerors who had perfected the art of psychological warfare. They did not destroy civilizations with weapons but by breaking their will to resist. Once a species lost hope, they became willing servants who helped the hegemony conquer others. Maria Santos reached similar conclusions through her analysis of galactic history. She estimated that over 200 intelligent species had fallen to the hegemony using identical methods. The monitoring stations were not for observation but for broadcasting psychic suppression, fields that made populations more compliant and easier to control. When General Wright received this information, he tried to warn the United Earth government but found that many world leaders had already fallen under alien influence. The psychic fields were strongest near major population centers where government buildings and military headquarters were located. Anyone who spent too much time near these areas became passive and accepting of hegemony guidance. The general realized that humanity was walking into the same trap that had claimed hundreds of other civilizations. The aliens had studied human psychology for years and knew exactly which buttons to push to make them submit. The technology gifts and promises of galactic membership were just bait to keep humans distracted, while the suppression fields did their work. Dr. Stone tried to contact Earth with her discoveries but found that communications were being monitored and filtered by the hegemony. Any message that questioned their motives or revealed dangerous truths was blocked before it could reach its destination. The aliens claimed this was for humanity's own protection during the sensitive evaluation period. Back on Earth, the effects of the psychic suppression became more obvious to those who knew what to look for. Crime rates dropped dramatically as people became less aggressive and more cooperative. Political protests disappeared as citizens accepted government decisions without question. Even family arguments became rare as emotional responses were dampened across the population. Only those with natural resistance to psychic influence remained fully aware of what was happening. Children seemed less affected than adults and people in remote areas away from the monitoring stations retained more of their independence. These individuals began to notice that something was terribly wrong with their world. Zethkar announced that humanity was progressing well in their trials and would soon be ready for the final evaluation. He praised human cooperation and their willingness to accept guidance from their galactic mentors. The ambassador assured everyone that integration into hegemony society would bring unprecedented peace and prosperity to Earth. General Wright knew that time was running out. Once the final evaluation began, humanity would lose their last chance to resist. He began quietly contacting military personnel who seemed unaffected by the suppression fields and started making plans for what might be their species' final stand. Dr. Stone and her team worked desperately to decode more of the Kethmori archives. Hidden among the records of their civilization's fall were references to weapons and strategies designed specifically to fight the hegemony. The previous inhabitants of New Haven had prepared for resistance even as their world was taken from them. The crystal archives contained one final message from the Kethmori leadership. They warned that the hegemony's greatest weapon was despair and that any species hoping to survive must never lose hope. The message ended with coordinates to hidden weapons caches and a plea for future victims to learn from their mistakes. As the suppression fields grew stronger and more humans fell under alien influence, a small number of individuals prepared to fight for their species' freedom. They did not yet know if resistance was possible, but they refused to surrender without trying. The battle for humanity's soul was about to begin. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the United Earth vessel Aurora and watched the stars through the main screen. They had traveled further from Earth than any human before them. The journey to Proxima Centauri had taken 3 months. Using the new faster-than-light drive that Earth scientists had finally perfected after decades of work, Lisa Grant checked her tactical display and frowned. Something was moving near the edge of their scanner range. She turned to Jake and pointed at her screen. The object was large and definitely not natural. It looked like a ship, but the design was unlike anything humans had ever built. Danny Rodriguez ran his hands over the engineering console and shook his head. The ship appeared to be dead in space with no energy readings coming from it. Amy Foster tried to send communication signals toward the vessel but received no response. The silence was complete and unsettling. Jake ordered the Aurora to move closer, to investigate. As they approached, the alien ship became clearer on their screens. It was massive and covered in strange markings that seemed to glow with their own light. The hull was made of some dark metal that their scanners could not identify. The design was elegant but also somehow threatening. Kevin Park studied the readings from his science station and noticed something odd. The ship was not as dead as it appeared. There were faint energy signatures deep inside the vessel that suggested life support systems were still running. He reported this to Jake, who decided they should attempt to board the alien ship. The away team consisted of Jake, Lisa, Danny, and 2 security officers named Pete, Wilson, and Carol Adams. They used the Aurora's shuttle to dock with the alien vessel through what appeared to be an airlock. The atmosphere inside was breathable but felt heavy and strange. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls. They moved through corridors that were clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. The walls were covered with symbols that seemed to move when viewed directly. Danny's equipment detected advanced technology throughout the ship, but most systems appeared to be in standby mode. In what seemed to be the main control room, they found them. 3 tall beings stood waiting as if they had expected the humans to arrive. They were humanoid but clearly alien, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Their leader stepped forward and spoke in perfect English. He introduced himself as Ambassador Zeth Kar of the Hegemony. He explained that his people had been watching human development for many years and were pleased that humanity had finally achieved faster-than-light travel. This was an important milestone that meant humans were ready for contact with the galactic community. Zethkar told them that the Hegemony was a peaceful alliance of many species who worked together for mutual benefit. Younger races like humanity needed to prove themselves worthy of membership through a series of trials that tested their technological abilities, cultural unity, and wisdom in warfare. The trials sounded reasonable to Jake and his crew. Humanity would need to demonstrate that they could innovate and solve complex problems. They would need to show that their species could work together despite their differences. Most importantly, they would need to prove that they understood when fighting was necessary, and when peace was the better choice. The ambassador offered to provide humanity with some basic improvements to their technology, as a gesture of goodwill. He also requested permission to establish a small monitoring station on Earth's moon to observe human progress during the trial period. This would allow the Hegemony to provide guidance when needed. Jake knew this decision was too important for him to make alone. He contacted Earth immediately and spoke with the leaders of the United Earth government. The news of first contact sent shockwaves around the world. Emergency sessions were held in every major capital as humanity debated how to respond to this opportunity. Kevin Park continued studying the alien ship and found things that troubled him. The vessel contained records of other species who had undergone similar trials, but the data about what happened to them was incomplete or missing entirely. When he asked Zethkar about this, the ambassador explained that successful species moved onto higher levels of galactic society and no longer needed monitoring. Despite Kevin's concerns, the decision was made to accept the hegemony's offer. The potential benefits of joining a galactic civilization were too great to ignore. Humanity would undergo the trials and prove themselves worthy of membership among the stars. The Aurora returned to Earth with Zethkar and his companions as honored guests. Construction of the monitoring station on Luna began immediately using a combination of human and alien technology. The station would allow the hegemony to observe human society and provide feedback on their progress. Within weeks, the first improvements to human technology began to show results. Medical advances eliminated several diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Energy production became more efficient and cleaner. Food production increased dramatically, ending hunger in many parts of the world. The future looked brighter than ever for humanity as they prepared to take their place among the stars. Few people noticed when several of Earth's colony worlds stopped responding to communication attempts. The hegemony assured everyone that this was normal during evaluation periods as colonies focused on internal development rather than external contact. Jake Morrison felt proud of his role in this historic moment, but Kevin Park's warnings echoed in his mind. Something about the aliens felt wrong, despite their helpful words and generous gifts. Time would tell whether humanity had found salvation or walked into a trap that would destroy everything they held dear.